Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is For the Record program number 343, titled Mein Jihad, Part 2, Old Complicities That Go Back to the Late 1930s, unquote. This program is being recorded on January 13th of the year 2002. As we continue to explore the events of September 11th, 2001, we're going to further explore an institution that has allegedly been involved in the pan-Islamist, or Islamo-fascist, as I call it, terrorist activities of Osama bin Laden and company. I should add that the people involved with this deny any involvement with bin Laden, but that is at variance with the analysis not only of U.S. intelligence, but also with investigators and intelligence operatives of other countries as well, though nothing has as yet been proven. We're going to be taking a look at Nada Management, or Al-Taqwa, as it was formerly called. This is an organization which unites the world of Islamic fundamentalism and what I call the Underground Reich, the underground mafia-like manifestation of the Third Reich. We've spoken about Al-Taqwa, Youssef Nada, and also Ahmed Huber, a German-Swiss-born Islamic fascist who's on the board of the directors of Al-Taqwa. In previous broadcasts, notably For the Record 335, 336, 338, 340, and 341, and in particular we focused on Al-Taqwa in the last broadcast, program 342. We're going to continue our exploration of the allegations concerning Al-Taqwa, and in this broadcast, we are going to look at why I believe, we're going to look at actually a manifestation which lends substance to the analysis that I presented initially about September 11th, namely that this is an attack by the Underground Reich on the United States, just like the Second World War. Just like the Second World War, powerful elements of our industrial establishment, particularly those associated with the petroleum industry and with the Bush family, are working with our enemies, and that in turn the sincerely patriotic elements of our military and intelligence community were betrayed by other elements of same, literally a fifth column, a fascist fifth column that is working with our enemies. Let me set the context of the title of this program. Again, Mein Jihad, Part 2, Old Complicities That Go Back to the Late 1930s. The focal point of our discussion in this broadcast is the book Dollars for Terror, subtitled The United States and Islam, authored by Richard Labeviere, L-A-B-E, accent aigu, V-I-E, accent grave, R-E. It was translated from the French by Martin de Mer. It was originally published in 1999 in France, and it was published in the year 2000 in softcover by Algora Publishing of New York, A-L-G-O-R-A. The ISBN number is 1-892941-06-6. Now, in this discussion, we're going to be taking a look at an Islamic fundamentalist organization called the Muslim Brotherhood that is referred to in journalistic shorthand by Labeviere as the Fraternity. In turn, I believe that the pan-Islamic or Islamo-fascist terrorism, which cuts across many elements of the Muslim world, including those that are lethally antagonistic, such as elements of the Sunni and Shiite divisions within Islam, I believe that some of the primary element of unity between these diverse elements of Islam is not only petroleum money and Saudi finance in particular, that conducted in concert with American petroleum interests and finance, but also with and especially by the Underground Reich. I would add that in For the Record 335, we took a look at allegations by the Swiss that Nada Management may have been involved in some of the stock speculation that many investigators believe was connected to the September 11th attacks. In 342, we took a look at the fact that Lugano, Switzerland, the epicenter for Nada Management, or Al-Taqwa, is also the epicenter for the industrial and financial empire of Heinrich Thyssen-Bornemisza, one of the primary elements in the Bormann, or the remarkable and deadly Bormann organization that I've spoken about in the past. Now, again, setting the context of the title of this program, Old Complicities That Go Back to the Late 1930s, Listen to the following discussion here of the fraternity or the Muslim Brotherhood to which Yosef Nada belongs. The discussion here is of the redeployment abroad after it was banned from Egypt, and that is the redeployment here, and the fraternity is La Baviere's name for the Muslim Brotherhood. Turning to Dollars for Terror, we read, "This pivotal role in the redeployment of the fraternity, played abroad by Saeed Ramadan, was also emphasized by Rifat Saeed, a deputy of the Egyptian left. Quote, before he settled in Europe, he made long sojourns in Saudi Arabia with King Faisal, then in Pakistan, where he worked with lawyers on the Islamic right. But by the end of the 1950s, he opened a new door by selling the Saudis on the idea of da'wah, i.e., the propagation of Islam, especially in Europe. Thus, he proposed to them initially to open a center in Munich, unquote. Why Munich? Why Germany? I asked Rifat Saeed, again quoting and setting the context of the title. Because there one finds old complicities that go back to the late 1930s, when the Muslim Brothers collaborated with the agents of Nazi Germany. And furthermore, Turkish immigration to Germany had started to become an important phenomenon. By soaking up the savings of these Muslim workers, Yosef Nada, like Saeed Ramadan, took advantage of an extremely favorable context and used it as a springboard for the Muslim Brothers' economic activities. For these various reasons, the Munich Center quickly became very important, unquote, adds the Egyptian deputy. And in exploring the alleged activities of Yosef Nada in this time period, once again from Dollars for Terror, in private, he had declared his solidarity with the Egyptian Muslim Brothers and the Algerian Islamists who, quote, are just now completing their war of decolonization, unquote. But Yosef Nada is even better known to the Egyptian services, who have evidence of his membership in the armed branch of the Fraternity of the Muslim Brothers in the 1940s. At that time, according to the same sources, he was working for the Abwehr under Admiral Canaris and took part in a plot against King Farouk. By the way, parenthetically, I would add that the Abwehr was German military intelligence in World War II. Continuing. This was not the first time that the path of the Muslim Brothers crossed that of servants of the Third Reich. The founder of the fraternity himself, Hassan al-Banna, served as an intermediary between those who went on to become the free officers, unquote, in particular Anwar al-Sadat, and the agents of Nazi Germany. Again quoting, the missions assigned to the Abwehr from this point forward began to go beyond simple military information, unquote, write Roger Faligot and Rémy Kaufer. Quote, the agents of Admiral Canaris would try to engage men of power in the Great German Plan, along with clandestine nationalists, ethnic groups with separatist aspirations, whole regions ready to rise up against the two empires that really counted, the French and the British, unquote. In 1954, Yosef Nada would also be implicated in the preparation of the failed plot against Nasser before he fled to Germany and finally to Italy. What we're going to do is to take a look now at a portion of the preface to Dollars for Terror, and this discusses the research of Richard Labeviere and how he was led in following this trail to not only Saudi finance, but to the Muslim Brotherhood, which he alleges is at the core of what he calls Islamism, or what I have termed in the past Islamo-fascism. And in turn, it should be noted that elements of the Islamo-fascist or Islamist community, including allegedly the Muslim Brothers, have worked very closely with Osama bin Laden, with al-Qaeda, and with elements of U.S., Saudi, and Pakistani intelligence that saw these elements as useful tools. This is not unlike the way that elements of our power structure collaborated with the fascist powers of Europe, who then turned on the United States, and we wound up fighting those whom powerful elements had helped to assist. That's actually redundant, but that is very much what I believe is happening today. Although I'm not at all sure the war is being prosecuted in the best fashion, at the same time I should underscore, at the risk of alienating some listeners, that I support military action. I believe this is an extension of the Second World War, and I believe that the fifth column that I believe was behind the attacks on September 11th and its allies around the world threaten the very future of humanity. And I think all listeners on all political stripes or all elements of the political spectrum should very carefully consider what I just said. Turning to the introduction to Dollars for Terror, on November 17, 1997, 62 people were assassinated in a temple in Luxor, Egypt, by an Islamist commando. Inquiring into the motives and the supporters of this massacre for the magazine Temps Présent, affiliated with Switzerland's French-speaking television station, my research invariably led me back to Saudi Arabia. Many times over, American, European, and Arab diplomats and public officials advised me to follow the trail of, quote, the dollars of terror, unquote. Indeed, by reconstructing the financial circuits of terrorism, one has a better chance of understanding the true nature of Islamist ideology. Every time, I was brought back to both the official and the secret structures of Saudi finance. Every time, I stumbled on the fraternity of the Muslim Brothers. The representatives of this cult, with Saudi Arabia's assistance, are financing influential associations in Egypt and also in Africa, in Asia, and in Europe. In the United States and in several European countries, representatives of the Muslim Brothers speak in the name of Islam and of the entire Muslim community. The confusion between Islamism and Islam is based on a triple ruse. Under cover of a spiritual quest, these agents of influence try to legitimate outright attacks on human rights, the bases of the Republic. Under cover of transcendence, they gradually undermine the separation of the political and the religious, which is one of the bases of democracy. Under cover of tolerance, they work to propagate a fascistic, if not fascist, ideology. Where does the money for this dangerous proselytism come from? The money that finances mosques and Quran schools, supports Islamist organizations, orchestrates the fight against the impious, unquote, regimes of the Arab Muslim world, and organizes the activism of certain Muslim communities of Europe? Since the Ayatollahs came to power, all our suspicions have turned toward Iran and its Shiite revolution. However, 4 years of research have established that the real threat lies elsewhere, in Saudi Arabia and other oil monarchies allied with the United States. The greatest world power is fully aware of this development. Indeed, its intelligence agencies have encouraged it. In certain parts of the world, the CIA and its Saudi and Pakistani homologues continue to support Islamism. Bear in mind, this book was written in 1999. What we're going to look at now are the Islamo-fascist, the Islamo-fascist nature of what Richard Labeviere refers to as the fraternity or the Muslim Brothers, alleged by Labeviere and others to be deeply involved not only with Islamic terrorism, but also with the organization of Osama bin Laden. I would note here that the Muslim Brothers have documented connections to people like the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, even though there are ideological differences which have led some members of the bin Laden organization, such as Mr. al-Zawahiri, to formally attack the Muslim Brothers, who primarily use financial and political power to achieve participation in various governments. Chapter 7 of Dollars for Terror is about the Muslim Brotherhood, and as we dolly out in this particular picture, we're going to take a look not only at Nada Management or Al-Taqwa and Ahmed Huber later in the program, but we're going to look at a number of very important parallels between the Muslim Brotherhood and fascism in a classical sense, and we're also later on in the program going to be taking a look at what I believe is not only a parallel organization of the Muslim Brotherhood to that of the Borman organization, organization. But as I have indicated in the past, I believe that the Underground Reich and the September 11th attacks were basically executed by the Bormann organization and its allies. And the analysis presented here will lend strong credence, I believe, to the hypothesis that the Muslim Brothers, or the fraternity, as it is dubbed by Richard Labeviere, and the Bormann organization are connected. Labeviere writes, "Who are the Muslim Brothers and what do they want? Their doctrines are organized around the central tenet of the fusion of religion and politics, the essence of the Islamist ideology. The history of the fraternity makes the Brothers' concept of the Islamic State clear, a theocratic state of fascistic inspiration." Skipping down. Today, the fraternity of the Muslim Brothers has become more or less clandestine. Seized by the demon of business, its new chief, the guide Mustafa Mashur, has chosen to increase the organization's economic and financial influence. The Muslim Brothers Bank has invested in several economic sectors, which helps it finance the propagation of Islam. Several leaders of the international organization of the Brothers sit on the bank's board of directors. Some of them were fellow travelers of the Nazis and are still trying today to resuscitate the old alliance of Islamism and the swastika. The Brothers Bank maintains relations with many Islamist organizations. And, skipping down once again, ultimately, this new, and this was many, many years ago at the founding of this cult, ultimately this new pan-Islamism found that Egypt offered a very propitious climate for achieving its objectives, which were often contrary to the interests of Egypt itself. They made their way through the intermediaries of the financial institutions and the nation's media, as well as by the means of certain ulemas who were richly compensated by the Islamic banks, where they were selected to serve as advisors, or by the states who called upon their services, unquote. Muhammad Sayyid al-Ashmawi continued, quote, "All my research always brings me back to the same point. At the beginning of this process of the perversion of Islam are the Muslim Brothers, an extreme right cult," unquote. An extreme right cult? Again quoting, "The history of the Muslim Brothers is infused and fascinated by fascistic ideology," unquote. Sayyid al-Ashmawi adds, again quoting, "Their doctrines, their total, if not totalitarian way of life takes as a starting point the same obsession with a perfect city on earth, in conformity with the celestial city, whose organization and distribution of powers they can discern through the lens of their fantastical reading of the Quran," unquote. This fascistic affiliation would crop up in the analyses of several of our interlocutors, in particular that of the journalist Eric Groulot, who is a specialist in the Middle East and the former French ambassador to Tunisia and Turkey. Skipping down again, we're going to take a look now at some of the temporal parallels between the growth of the Muslim Brotherhood and key dates in the development of fascism. Bear in mind that as we looked at in RFA 17, in 1929, fascist Italy signed the Lateran Treaty with the Vatican, which made Roman Catholicism the official state religion of Italy, and which in turn restructured Italian law in consideration of several of the key dogmatic elements of Roman Catholicism. And it was in 1929 that the Muslim Brotherhood coalesced. The fraternity of the Muslim Brothers gathered a large following since its creation on April 11, 1929 by Hassan al-Banna, a 22-year-old teacher. Right from the start, the fraternity benefited not only from a historical memory that favored its rapid expansion, but it arose at a propitious moment during a confrontation between partisans and adversaries of the revival of Islam. This debate reached its apogee with the publication of Sheikh Ali Abdel Razak's book, Islam and the Origins of Power, which resolutely promoted the separation of the state and the religion. The work was burned in public, and book burnings were followed by proclamations that stoked the fires of tradition. Note the parallels to Nazi book burning here. Continuing. The British occupation also fed this movement. Lastly, the emergence and the rise to power of fascism, hostile to French and British colonialism, gave rise to many analogies with corporatist propaganda and the methods of mobilization of Mussolini's gangs. Denouncing philosophy and the social sciences as practices contrary to the teachings of the Quran, Hassan al-Banna founded the essentials of his message on the condemnation of the principle of separation of state and religion, and set the establishment of a theocratic state as his movement's goal. He also preached the re-establishment of the caliphate as the only framework that could be effective in uniting all the believers, and promoted the dissolution of political parties which, according to him, divide the Muslims. Reducing Western civilization to colonialism, Hassan al-Banna summarizes his movement's ideology thus, quote, "Islam is doctrine, divine worship, the fatherland, the nation, religion, spirituality, the Quran, and the sword," unquote. And we're going to note here a couple of other interesting temporal parallels with fascism. Hassan al-Banna moved to Cairo in 1933 when Hitler became chancellor, and I would note that many of the key fundamentalist programs of the Muslim Brotherhood were adopted in 1939, which of course is when World War II began. In 1933, Hassan al-Banna, a teacher in Ismailia, was nominated to Cairo, where the organization's headquarters were established. He took the title of Supreme Guide, unquote, and worked toward the development of a political, economic, and social program. On the basis of his interpretation of the fundamental texts of Islam, the fraternity adopted a program in 1939 whose principal political objective is to have a constitution adopted that would arise directly from the Quran. And skipping down, we're going to look here at specific and overt elements of parallel between the Muslim Brotherhood and Mussolini's corporate state that we looked at in detail in Miscellaneous Archive Show M42. Taking Italy's choices under Mussolini for inspiration, the economic program of the fraternity set three priorities: the instigation of a land reform, the prohibition of usury, and the termination of income tax, which was replaced by the religious tax, the zakat. The social policy foresaw a new law on labor founded on corporations. This economic program would more directly reveal its relationship to totalitarian ideologies a few years later with the works of Muhammad Ghazali, Islam and Economic Questions, of Syed Qutb, Social Justice in Islam, and of al-Bahi Lotfi, Islam, Neither Communism Nor Capitalism. The populist contents of such writings corresponds to the social profile of most of the followers, who were recruited from the better-off rural populace and the urban middle class. The brothers denounced the profiteers and those who were starving the people. Muhammad Ghazali recommended, quote, "an economic regimen similar to that which existed in Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy," unquote. The moral code is also an important component in this program, which is intended to create the, quote, "new Muslim man," unquote. It is founded on the strict observance of the rules of Islam, the punishment of any transgression, and on a teaching strictly in conformity to the precepts of Islam. Women's role in society is examined closely. The notion of the equality of the sexes is inherently negated by the concept of the supremacy of male social responsibilities. Justified by a literal interpretation of the Quran, the, quote, "natural," unquote, place of the woman is in the home. Repudiation and polygamy are legitimized by the same reading. I would add that the concept of the new Muslim man and the new German of Nazi Germany, and also the relegation of the place of women to an officially second-class position, are also are actually in and of themselves identical not only to Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, but I would also note the similarity to the right-wing Christian fundamentalist program in the United States, the Christian right very, very strongly connected to the Republican Party. What we're going to take a look at in the final item of discussion in this first side of the program is the economic program of the Muslim Brotherhood or the fraternity, also its role in working on behalf of the Axis powers against the British in pre-war Palestine, and its support for the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, a key Axis operative and someone who recruited Muslim Waffen-SS divisions for Hitler and was very active right on up through the World Muslim Congress that played a primary role in the anti-Soviet Afghan War of the 1980s. Speaking of the economic program of the fraternity or the Muslim Brotherhood, in accordance with its program, the third pillar on which the brothers intended to build their influence supports the economic activities of the traditional religious fraternities found on the corporations of trades. In line with the interests of its customers, the fraternity developed a major sector for small industrial and commercial companies in Fiche du Monde Arabe, or Files on the Arab World. Lucien Georges cites, among others, the Islamic Transactions Company, specializing in transport, the Islamic Press Society, unquote, which puts out various newspapers and publications, the Muslim Brothers Company for spinning and weaving, unquote, a kind of cooperative belonging to its employees, and the Engineering Trade and Labor Company, which associated several companies in the vicinity of Alexandria. By the end of the 1930s, the fraternity claimed some 500,000 members. Up until the Second World War, it strove to develop its economic sector, to refine its ideological concepts, to train its representatives, and to improve its organization and its techniques of social penetration. In 1936, during the Arab Revolt in Palestine, the fraternity made its first incursion into the political arena. The Muslim Brothers tried out their pan-Islamic slogans against British colonialism while proclaiming their support for the Mufti of Jerusalem. Skipping down, in 1942, the fraternity clandestinely established its military branch. This came to light in a spectacular way with the assassination, while the Parliament was in full session on February 24, 1945, of Prime Minister Ahmad Maher. He had just declared war on the Axis powers. And we're going to continue with our analysis of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and elsewhere in the Middle East during World War II and later. Bear in mind, according to Egyptian intelligence, Youssef Nada, as a very young man, was working for the Abwehr, German military intelligence, against the British on behalf of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Axis. And bear in mind that it was, of course, Youssef Nada who founded Al-Taqwa, later Nada Management. And he denies, of course, all involvement with terrorism. If many of the concepts and some of the elements of discussion, both about September 11th and other matters, seem strange to listeners, that is understandable. Let me make some references that will help to flesh out your understanding. First of all of the programs I've done in the past are available from Spitfire, S-P-I-T-F-I-R-E, one word, P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, 95005. Email, mail, M-A-I-L, at Spitfirelist.com. Spitfirelist is one word, Spitfirelist.com. You can visit the Real Audio-equipped Spitfire website where, in the For the Record section, actually there are descriptions of all of the programs available from Spitfire, and in the For the Record section, there are detailed, annotated descriptions of all of the For the Record programs, including, by the time listeners hear this, of For the Record 343. Sister station WFMU-FM has archived the For the Record programs on Real Audio. More recent programs are streaming at wfmu.org/Dave Emory, D-A-V-E-E-M-O-R-Y. And I'm happy to report that as of January 13th, 2002, for all intents and purposes, all of the Back For the Record programs are available on another URL for download only. There are links to the download only URL on both the wfmu.org/Dave Emory site and on the Spitfire website at spitfirelist.com. That concludes Side 1 of For the Record Program 343, Mein Jihad, Part 2, Old Complicities that Go Back to the Late 1930s. This is being recorded on January 13th of 2002. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is Side 2 of For the Record Program number 343, titled Mein Jihad, Part 2, Old Complicities going back to the late 1930s. This is being recorded on January 13th of the year 2002, and we're continuing the discussion of the events in and around September 11th. I would also point out that this discussion represents a development of the analysis of the alleged role of an organization called Nada Management, formerly Al-Taqwa, and some of its fascist and fascist fellow traveling associates in the events of September 11th, a role that they firmly deny, but that is alleged by, among other institutions, the U.S. government and intelligence community. Now, we've been examining a book called Dollars for Terror, subtitled The United States and Islam. This was authored by Richard Labeviere, translated by Martin Demer, published first in French in 1999 and then in English, copyright 2000 in softcover by Algora Publishing. And we're going to resume with our discussion of the Muslim Brotherhood, or the fraternity, as it's called by Richard Labeviere. This organization is allegedly not only involved with elements of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, but has strong connections to Saudi Arabia, to Saudi Wahhabism, and also through the petroleum industry to elements of U.S. intelligence. And I believe that this is one of the central elements in the fascist fifth column that doubled on the United States and U.S. intelligence and the military in the September 11th attacks. Turning now to Dollars for Terror by Richard Labeviere, of the role of the fraternity or the Muslim Brotherhood to which Yusuf Nada belonged in attempting to oust the British from the Middle East during World War II. And I think from a conceptual standpoint, we could think of Al-Qaeda and its Islamo-fascist allies as representing, in effect, a post-war underground Reich manifestation of the Africa Corps. Turning to Dollars for Terror, of the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood's military branch in World War II, in 1942, the fraternity clandestinely established its military branch. This came to light in a spectacular way with the assassination, while the Parliament was in full session on February 24, 1945, of Prime Minister Ahmad Maher. He had just declared war on the Axis powers. The brothers would also finance the assassination of Minister Amin Osman Pasha on January 5, 1946, for the crime of Anglophilia, and the same year, that of the chief of the police force, Selim Zaki Pasha. In 1947, the Muslim Brothers fought in the first rows in the war in Palestine. 1 year later, in Egypt once again, the fraternity's armed branch did not put down its weapons, but engaged in a direct confrontation with the ruling power, following the dismantling of one of its training camps at Mokatam in the Cairo suburbs. Another political assassination followed in March 1948, this time killing Judge Ahmad Kazindar, who had just condemned one of the brothers for his participation in an armed attack. The fraternity, suspected of preparing a coup d'etat, was dissolved at the king's orders on December 6, 1948. Bear in mind that Yusuf Nada, a member of this organization in World War II, and allegedly, according to Egyptian intelligence, working for the Third Reich in this area. What we're going to look at now is the role of the economic component of the Muslim Brotherhood. This goes back to its formation, and what we're going to look at is a structure which I believe is not only parallel to that of the remarkable and deadly Borman organization, about which I've spoken in the past, but one which I believe is inextricably linked with the Borman organization, both in its Middle Eastern Saudi petro-fascist, to coin a term, connections, but also through to the Bush family and this fifth column that I believe it was the American component of the attack on September 11th. In For the Record Program 342, we took a look at an Egyptian called Ismail, who was one of the informants of Richard Labeviere for this book. And what we're going to look at is Ismail's connections, allegations concerning the economic power of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then we're going to jump back in time and then move forward. Continuing our exploration of the maze, my anonymous interlocutor, the former manager of a large Saudi bank, affirmed that alongside Yusuf Nada, There is another Egyptian, IS, called Ismail, who oversees matters connected with several holding companies in which the bank is a shareholder. Director of the company Spacetronic Salah International, an electronic products company that trades mainly with Sudan, this former member of the armed branch of the brothers followed the same route as Youssef Nada, his alter ego. And what we're going to look at next is the economic power, again, of the Muslim Brotherhood. And we're going to take a look at the Muslim Brotherhood's focus on and settling in Afghanistan as the site for its intended reconstitution of the Caliphate, or an Islamo-fascist, Islamic fundamentalist empire. Turning now to, once again, to Dollars for Terror. After being imprisoned 3 times in 1948, in 1954, and 1965, Mustafa Mashur was promoted. By the way, he is the, quote, supreme guide, unquote, sort of the Islamo-Führer of the Muslim Brotherhood. When the brothers were released from prison at the beginning of Anwar al-Sadat's presidency, the military branch created in the 1940s reconstituted itself under the name of the Special Order, unquote. Consequently, this armed group has run the Egyptian and international branches of the organization. Mashur was one of the heads of the Special Order, and so it is absolutely natural that he is the new supreme guide today. Strangely, he left Egypt just a few days before the assassination of Sadat, unquote. By the way, the turncoat or double agent for al-Qaeda inside of U.S. intelligence that we looked at in, for the record, 338, Ali Mohammed, and also Mr. al-Zawahiri, Osama bin Laden's right-hand man, are connected to Egyptian Islamic Jihad, which appears to have been one of the primary elements involved in the assassination of Anwar Sadat. Speaking of the coalescing of the fraternity or Muslim Brotherhood in Afghanistan, Mashur returned to Egypt only in 1986, and from that time on, he devoted himself entirely to making the international organization of the brothers in the service of the Arab volunteers for Afghanistan. Quote, at the time, he saw that holy war as heralding the creation of a future Islamic state in Afghanistan, adds his former counterpart. Again quoting, at the time, the fraternity saw that country as the site for the refounding of the Caliphate, the only political structure likely to unite all the Muslims one day. Today, Mashur is 77 years old. By the way, that would have been at the time of the writing of this book in 1999. Note that the Taliban and Mullah Omar, married to one of Osama bin Laden's daughters, saw themselves in exactly that same context. Now, of the economic power of the Muslim Brotherhood, we read, obviously, one runs into a wall of silence and fear as soon as one evinces too much interest in the fraternity's economic and financial activities. However, since the late 1920s, it has run a parallel economy. In Cairo, its 5 supermarkets bear the sign Al-Tawhid Unity, are well known, as are certain butcher shops and car showrooms. But these establishments represent only the visible layer of an economy that is far more ramified. Nothing official, of course, just some modest shops, a constellation of small businesses, butchers, spinning mills, drapers, fabric dyeing, and small currency exchange offices, so many tradesmen who will never acknowledge their links with the fraternity, but whose profits flow into the Islamic banks and capital investment companies that, for their part, operated in broad daylight in the 1980s. And I would add that consider the Borman organization and the Brotherhood as the Islamic manifestation of the Borman organization, initially parallel, now, I believe, hooked up to it. Thanks to the liberalization of the banking sector, these companies have come out of the shadows to some extent to take advantage of the various tax and financial benefits made possible by the new legislation, but also openly to defy the legitimacy of the Egyptian state. Quote, believing that this would help diffuse the Islamists' demands for the application of the Sharia and for the Islamization of the society, Presidents Sadat and Mubarak themselves supported the emergence and the growth of an Islamic world of finance, unquote, since the end of the 1970s, adds Said. Again quoting, "This specific economic area gradually has been transformed into a forum for disputing the Egyptian economic and political order," unquote. Through legalistic economic and financial practices, the Muslim Brothers and their other Islamic partners in finance work to crack the two pillars of the legitimacy of the state, that is, the neutrality of its banking structure and the sovereignty of the decisions it takes in the control of the national economy. And again, think of the Borman Organization in the context of what you're about to hear. Under Mustafa Mashur's guidance, the fraternity's economic apparatus pursues the same goal as the military apparatus, the obligatory reunification of the Muslim community. In this economic view, the believers will no longer be brought together by overtly political or insurrectionary means, but by means of the none too easily controlled financial transactions. Since religion is not to be separated from the economy, the various financial practices will have to conform with Islamic law in order to constitute an economically autonomous system of exchanges. Islamic finance, the extension of the holy war by other means. While they are particularly involved in this new theological financial strategy, the Muslim Brothers do not have a monopoly on it, and they benefit from the transnational financial tools of the Gulf countries working on a planet-wide scale. The, quote, pan-Islamic propaganda of the great Saudi banks, like that of the International Association of Islamic Banks chaired by Prince Mohammed Faisal, makes much of the necessity to unify the Muslim community through finance, and in this respect it is significant, unquote, explains Michel Galou, a researcher at the Center for Economic, Legal, and Social Studies and Documentation of Cairo. And we're going to skip down now to a discussion of Ahmed Huber, another member of Al-Taqwa's Board of Management, or of NADA Management. We've looked at Huber in the past, and we're going to discuss not only some of his fascist connections, and by the way, one of the things not mentioned here is his association with the NPD, arguably the top German so-called neo-Nazi party, and the German ally of the National Alliance, arguably the most important American so-called neo-Nazi organization, and the parent organization of National Vanguard Books that publishes Serpent's Walk. Turning once again to Dollars for Terror of Ahmed Huber, referred to here as AH, and a member of the board of directors of Al-Taqwa, referred to as AT. Bear in mind this book was published in 1999, well before 2001, and before the U.S. government put Al-Taqwa on its list of terrorist supporting organizations. Of Ahmed Huber, we read, another member of the Al-Taqwa Board of Directors links the history of that bank to that of the complex bonds woven between Islamism and the swastika. And, skipping down again, twice in 1963 and 1965 in the Egyptian capital, he met Johann von Leers, the former right-hand man of Dr. Goebbels, who, quote, opened his eyes to the real meaning of the great adventure of the Third Reich, unquote. Now proclaiming a moderated revisionism, unquote, he acknowledges that there was indeed genocide, but refuses to accept the, quote, distorted interpretation, unquote, given by the Americans, the Russians, and the Israelis, unquote. In tandem with his growing fascination for the architects of the New Order, unquote, he took up various Arab causes, one after another. The walls of his office, like some kind of Ali Baba cave of revisionism, are covered with portraits that symbolize this convergence of the revival between Islam and the Christian West, unquote. The place of honor is given to Chancellor Hitler, the man who upset the world the most and made his mark on universal history, unquote. A second photograph, in which Hitler is talking with Himmler, hangs next to those of Necmettin Erbakan and Jean-Marie Le Pen. By the way, Jean-Marie Le Pen is the French fascist and the director of the Front National, about which we've spoken many times in the past. Continuing, Erbakan, head of the Turkish Islamist party Rafah, turned to Ahmed for an introduction to the chief of the French party of the far right. Exiting from the meeting, which took place in September of 1995, Huber's two friends supposedly stated that they, quote, share the same view of the world, unquote, and expressed their common desire to work together to remove the last racist obstacles that still prevent the union of the Islamist movement with the national right of Europe, unquote. What we're going to do now is to skip ahead. In addition to Jean-Marie Le Pen and Huber's other fascist and Nazi connections, we're going to take a look now at Huber's connections with some of the occult fascist elements currently operating in Europe and descended from some of their antecedents with the Third Reich, and we're going to look at some other familiar names. Of Huber, Labaviere writes, a member of the group Avalon, which claims to be based on the great Celtic tradition, at every solstice Huber meets under the moon amidst great trees with a few hundred European druids with whom he is preparing the, quote, end of our decline, unquote. With the group Tula, a secret society particularly popular in the German administration and the political class, he works for the restoration of Greater Germany, unquote. The Tula group's ties with Islam go back many years, in particular through the theories of Haushofer, Horbiger, and René Guénon. In the wake of Ahnenerbe, that was the SS Ancestral Research Bureau and Occult Specialty Society, in the wake of the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi Society for Esoteric Studies, bonds were woven between Islam and the neo-Nazi far right. With the French hard-right club de Loge, the bank shareholder strives to make contact with all true European and American nationalists, unquote. Recently, he went to Chicago for a discreet congress that brought together the, quote, authentic right and the fighters for Islam, unquote, and he says that, again quoting, major decisions were taken, the reunification is underway, unquote. And we're going to pause from our discussion of Dollars for Terror, and we're going to turn to another book that we've used many times in the past. This is an essential text for anyone studying contemporary politics and fascism. I'm referring, as many listeners may guess, to the encyclopedic Dreamer of the Day, Francis Parker Yockey and the Post-War Fascist International, authored by the brilliant Kevin Coogan and published in softcover by Autono Media, and copyright 1999. The ISBN number is 1-57027-039-2, and I would note that the text is edited by WFMU on-air personality Dave Mandel. Of the connections between Karl Haushofer, the developer of the geopolitics that affected Adolf Hitler, and of his association with Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, and the far-right Tula Society, we read in Dreamer of the Day, talking about the association between Hitler and Karl Haushofer. They first met in Munich in the early 1920s through Haushofer's protege Rudolf Hess, who was a member of Munich's influential far-right Tula Society. After the collapse of the beer hall putsch, Hess briefly hid from the authorities in Haushofer's summer home in the Bavarian Alps. While visiting Hess in Landsberg prison, Haushofer again met Hitler. And I would note that in For the Record program number 211, among other broadcasts, we noted some of the connections between fascism and elements of the occult and the counterculture, including the black metal milieu, also elements of the conspiracy community. And one of the elements of overlap is an organization called the Black Order that was founded by New Zealand occultist and fascist Kerry Bolton. And Kerry Bolton, by the way, publishes some of the books of Francis Parker Yockey, the focal point of Kevin Coogan's book. Kerry Bolton founded an organization called the Black Order, and it in turn looks to not only Nazism but the Tula Society. Turning to Dreamer of the Day, the Black Order's self-proclaimed purpose is, quote, to study the esoteric current behind National Socialism, Tula, and the occult tradition from which they are derived, to prepare a political and cultural infrastructure to replace the collapsing of the old order, and to preserve the dark forces on Earth via ritual magic, study, propaganda, infiltration, and any other means deemed necessary, unquote. We're going to return to Dreamer of the Day in a second, but let's return to Dollars for Terror, and we're going to look at another familiar name that is associated with Ahmed Huber. During his many tribulations, Ahmed Huber became acquainted with the neo-Nazi banker François Genoux, whose path in life presents a singular summary of the interconnections, the specific alliances that have been tied and untied between Islam and the swastika. Still referring to the neo-Nazi banker, Ahmed Huber told Pierre Payen, quote, "I never asked him any questions, but I noted that in circles as different as the German Right, the Islamic movements of Asia, the Palestinians, and in the Maghreb, people speak of him with great respect. Everyone told me, he helped us. I have the impression that he played an important though discreet role. It was I who introduced him to the Iranians." That about François Genoux. And I'm going to review an element that we've looked at in For the Record. By the way, we looked at Genoux in a big way in the Miscellaneous Archive shows M19 and M21. We have also looked at Genoux in a big way in For the Record program 333. We came back to Genoux in For the Record program number 341, and we're going to look at him again. And turning once again to Dreamer of the Day, of François Genoux, Kevin Coogan writes in Appendix E, Sheikh François, friend to Hitler and Carlos the Jackal, on May 30th, 1996, an obscure Swiss banker named François Genoux committed suicide in Geneva, Switzerland. From the brief mention of his death in the New York Times, one would not know that one of the most important figures in the history of 20th century terrorism had died. And how many men can say that they were friends with both Adolf Hitler and Carlos the Jackal? Skipping ahead once again. Genoux, too, was in the thick of things, having established a friendship with SS General Karl Wolff, leader of the German team in Italy that negotiated Operation Sunrise with Dulles. Shortly after the war, Genoux acquired the publishing rights to the works of Adolf Hitler, Martin Bormann, and Joseph Goebbels. He also played a major, if murky, role in aiding fugitive Nazi war criminals. Another key player in the post-war Nazi underground resident in Switzerland was SD Colonel Eugen Dolman, Wolff's chief lieutenant in the talks with Dulles. Besides Wolff, Dolman and Genoux had another friend in common, Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Genoux first met the Grand Mufti in Jerusalem in 1936 and again in Berlin during the war. And skipping down, in 1955, with the Grand Mufti's friend Johann von Leers helping to run Egypt's propaganda ministry and its all-important Institute for the Study of Zionism, Genoux began to see Egypt as a base for the anti-French FLN independence movement in Algeria. And of Genoux's role in helping to generate support for Carlos the Jackal after his arrest in Sudan in 1994, note that Zacharias Moussaoui, an alleged member of Al-Taqwa who has been indicted, has as his attorney the future wife of Carlos the Jackal who represented Carlos after his arrest in Sudan in 1994. Genoux became directly involved in helping Carlos after the Jackal was arrested in the Sudan by French agents on August 15, 1994. For some years after Wadi Haddad's death, Carlos operated out of bases in Hungary and other Eastern European countries. He also spent time in Damascus. After his arrest, Genoux publicly expressed his great admiration for Carlos, whom Genoux considered one of the heroes of the Palestinian cause. Yet another friend of Ahmed Huber. In For the Record programs 330 and number 337, we took a look at the fact that Prince Turki, the now deposed head of Saudi intelligence, was, contrary to official accounts, running Osama bin Laden. I would note that Prince Turki was deposed as the chief of Saudi intelligence the week before the September 11th attacks. Returning to Dollars for Terror, we're going to take a look at a discussion that alleges that Prince Turki and associated elements of U.S. intelligence were in fact running Osama bin Laden all along. Contrary to its recurring denials, the bin Laden family never cut its ties with Osama, the prodigal son. In spite of his loss of Saudi nationality, which was announced in response to international requirements, Osama always relied on the family group to conclude the training and the many relocations of his Afghan mercenaries. These successive redeployments were always carried out at the instigation of Turkey and in connection with his CIA contacts. Among his many activities, the chief of the Saudi Secret Service, endowed with a power that cuts across many fields, politically supervises the allocation of state contracts and always gives preference to the bin Laden group and assures it the best terms of payment. This meticulous care partly explains the financial power of Osama bin Laden, the banker of the Jihad, unquote. And skipping down yet again, still today, Prince Turki, the constrained friend of the CIA and his Secret Service, make abundant use of Osama bin Laden's networks, whereas the Federal Court of New York has issued an international warrant for his arrest. Taking into account the close ties between the United States and Saudi Arabia, it is inconceivable that bin Laden remains beyond reach. Bin Laden's networks, with all their many branches, also enjoy the active support of the Muslim Brothers. The powerful religious fraternity never refused to put its military and financial logistics at the disposal of the Saudi billionaire. And jumping back to the present, the New York Times of January 10th of 2002, that a Thursday, has the following Reuters story, dateline Zurich, January 9th. Swiss firm closes amid inquiry. A Swiss company that is under investigation for possible financial transactions for people suspected in the September 11th attacks said today that it was shutting down because negative publicity had caused business to dry up. Youssef Nada, the founder and senior executive of Nada Management Organization based in Lugano, Switzerland, said that the company had already gone into liquidation. What do you expect after all that? Mr. Nada said, as quoted by the New York Times, and jumping back to Dollars for Terror of Youssef Nada and all that, unquote. But Youssef Nada is even better known to the Egyptian Secret Services, who have evidence of his membership in the armed branch of the Fraternity of the Muslim Brothers in the 1940s. At that time, according to the same sources, he was working for the Abwehr under Admiral Canaris and took part in a plot against King Farouk. This was not the first time that the path of the Muslim Brothers crossed that of the servants of the Third Reich. And skipping ahead, why Munich? Why Germany? I asked Rifat Saeed. Because there one finds old complicities that go back to the late 1930s, when the Muslim Brothers collaborated with the agents of Nazi Germany, unquote. Past broadcasts are available from Spitfire, P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, 95005. You can visit their website at spitfirelist.com, and all of the For the Record programs are archived by WFMU at wfmu.org/Dave Emory. This concludes Side 2 of For the Record Program 343, Mein Jihad, Part 2, Old Complicities that go back to the late 1930s. This is being recorded on January 13th of 2002. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening.